Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Module 26, and I'm Mr. McKinney, and I'm going to just quickly take you through this module for this week. And this week's module is my favorite war of all history. It is World War I. Now, what is different about this module when you do the read especially, you're going to see that what you learned in 7th grade is covered, but it's not the focal point of the read. Focal point of the read is kind of what the effects in South Carolina of World War I are. So for that reason, the three things you need to know have sort of like a different feel than a normal World War I unit. Now, first off, you do have to explain, or should be able to explain, why the United States entered World War I. The second thing, you should describe the effects of the United States involvement in the war and the outcome of the war. So, like I said, this read is very big on what are the effects of the United States involvement. And then last, show an understanding of the economic impact of the war on South Carolina and the United States. So there is a huge economic impact, and that is a huge focal point of this week. Now, of course, if you look at that picture, that is a picture most of you have seen many times in history class. That is Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And this is taken probably minutes before he gets shot and killed in that very car. And that, of course, is what sparks the entire World War I conflict in Europe. But we're not going to focus on that. Instead, we're going to focus on the United States and its involvement in the war. So, how did we enter the war? President Wilson does not want any part of this war. President Wilson campaigns for re-election, and his campaign slogan is, "He kept us out of the war." So it's obvious he wants nothing to do with World War I. He thinks it's a European conflict, and the United States has nothing to do with it. But circumstances make it so we do have to enter World War I. Now, there's two main reasons why we have to enter. Number one, the Germans, somewhat unexplained, begin to practice this unrestricted submarine warfare concept, where basically if it's a tanker or a warship or a sailboat or just like a fishing boat or even a cruise ship, they are going to blow it up and not even ask why it's in German water. Now, this is a very dangerous practice, and it ends up biting them because the Lusitania is a British, basically a cruise ship, and it has 128 Americans on board. Well, unrestricted submarine warfare calls for the German U-boats to sink it, and it kills everyone on board, including the Americans. So as you can imagine, America is upset. We're appalled. We're not even a part of this war, and you're killing Americans. So that's kind of the first strike and the second strike. The submarine warfare and the Lusitania are strikes 1 and 2. Now, things are already very tense, but the Zimmerman telegram is strike 3, we've got to go to war. And I put a picture of the actual telegram that was intercepted by the British. Now, the British want the United States to enter the war, so they are very eager to deliver this to the United States. But basically what the Zimmerman telegram is Germany sending a telegram to Mexico. And these series of numbers here, once you've sort of deciphered what the numbers mean, the series of numbers tell Mexico, hey, what we think you should do is you should attack the United States. So Germany wants Mexico to attack the United States, and they offer their support, and they say, if you can attack the United States, we're going to help you, and once you win, we're going to let you keep that land. So it's basically a telegram telling Mexico that Germany wants to be allies with them. Now, once this is intercepted, President Wilson has no choice, and in December of 1917, the United States enters the war and basically turns the tides of the war in the Allies' favor. So had the United States not entered the war, we'll never know, but it did not look like the Allies would have won without the United States. So, what are the effects of the actual war? And this is something you don't really go into as much in 7th grade, but first off, nationalism and patriotism in the United States were at all-time highs. The support for the war, one poll had it at 93%. So 93% of all Americans wanted people to be supportive of the war and actually to interact with soldiers, support them, do anything they can to help us win the war. Now, there is a very controversial law that is passed called the Sedition Act. That's what this political cartoon is about. The Sedition Act is basically taking away the First Amendment freedom of speech. If you were against the war, you could not say it or you were put in jail. And so you can see that even though everybody was for the war for the most part, the Sedition Act had a lot of people that were concerned about, hey, we're taking away freedom of press, we're taking away freedom of speech. What are we doing during this war? Because it's not very American. In South Carolina, anti-German prejudice was huge because basically Germany was made out to be the bad guy of the entire war. And so if you remember the Hamburg Massacre from a few modules ago, Hamburg is named after a city in Germany. Well, people there did not want to be associated with Germany at all. To tell you how bad anti-German prejudice was, Hamburg, South Carolina renamed their city North Augusta, South Carolina, because they did not want anybody to think that they were German. Now, you did cover this last bullet point in 7th grade. When the Allies win, the Europeans want to punish the losing side, and that's going to set up World War II pretty badly because Hitler, of course, is going to use that Allies winning and punishing the losing side as sort of his fuel and rise to power during World War II. Now, the last thing that I said you should get out of this module is the economic impact in South Carolina and America. The last few modules, we've been talking about how bad the economy is in South Carolina, how everything's terrible, the farmers are bad, the mill villages are terrible. Well, World War I is an economic godsend. World War I makes the economy boom, and South Carolina has the highest demand for cotton that it ever has because people need that cotton for uniforms and materials for the war. So South Carolina is in good economic shape during the actual war. They also build military bases here because our climate is sort of warm and never really freezing cold. And so they start training the troops here in South Carolina for the war. Now in the north, factories are booming, textile mills in the north and the south are booming, and it's all because of the war. So this is actually good for women and African Americans because there is a workforce shortage. All the men are all fighting, and so the African American and the women, they all go into the factories, and for the first time they're allowed to make money like the white men are. Now, the last thing I've got up here, and I've actually got a map on the right here, all of this calls what we call the Great Migration out of the South. African Americans see the writing on the wall in the South and see that things aren't really getting much better. And so over the next 50 years or so, there's going to be over 6 million African Americans that move out of the South into the cities in the North, and you can see even some of them are moving very far west into California. You've got some that are moving into Kansas. The exodusters are mentioned in the read. And so the Great Migration is caused by World War I. Now that was kind of a quick whirlwind tour of what the effects of World War I are. Your read this week is going to kind of drill it down in more specific details, but I did want to give you the high points of World War I in South Carolina. Like I said, this is my favorite war, so I wish we talked about it much more in much more detail and for much longer, but you guys have a great week. And this week, the word of the week is Great Migration. And I will talk to you soon.